Welcome back to the quiet garden. Here, you do not need to try to do anything. You do not need to become anyone. Just sit, listen, and breathe. All day long, our minds are bombarded by noise, expectations, worries, reactions, and a constant rush. But right now, you no longer have to fight. All you need to do is let yourself rest. Like a lake that becomes still after the wind dies down. Like a stream that quiets in the forest at night. Close your eyes if you want to. Feel the gentle rhythm of your breath passing through your nose. Inhale slowly and exhale deeply. One more time. Let your mind settle, like sand sinking to the bottom of a jar. Tonight, you will hear ancient Zen stories, fragments of wisdom that have been preserved for hundreds of years. They are not here to explain, but to awaken, not to make you change, but to help you remember what you have always known deep within. Peace does not come from controlling everything around us, but from not reacting to it. That is the path we are about to take together. Starting now, in the still mist of an early morning in a distant mountain. Before the forest birds had finished their songs, the peaceful atmosphere of the monastery was suddenly torn apart by strange sounds, full of anger and despair. A man dressed in luxurious silk, hair disheveled, face red with fury, stormed into the temple courtyard, eyes blazing as if the whole world had betrayed him. His shouting echoed through the quiet space, "Master Woe, you must help me. My entire shipment was stolen. What will happen to my family?" His voice, sharp as a blade, sliced through the stones, the falling leaves, silencing the birds. Young monks meditating beneath the trees looked up in alarm. Some stepped aside, others quietly retreated into the main hall to avoid the storm that had just arrived. No one dared to approach. But in the midst of all the chaos, one person remained completely steady. Like a pine tree standing firm in the wind, Zen Master Woe. Sitting by a small rock garden, holding a wooden rake, carefully drawing smooth lines across the white sand. Each pass of the rake created a soft curve, neat and clean, like a drawing born from a calm mind. These simple patterns reflected not only nature, but also the inner world of the one creating them. Despite the angry footsteps coming closer, despite the yelling growing louder, Master Woe continued his work as if he and the ground beneath his hands were breathing in unison. The merchant could not bear the indifference. He charged into the garden, stomping across the freshly drawn lines in the sand, his dusty shoes crushing the patterns like a challenge to peace itself. Not stopping there, he grabbed the rake from the master's hands and threw it violently onto the stone floor. The sharp crack of splintered wood ringing out. "Are you even listening to me? Look at me. I have lost everything," he screamed, his voice breaking into the silence. No longer angry, but filled with pain, Master Woe slowly looked up. His gaze held no anger, no avoidance, just a deep, still look, like the surface of a lake at dawn. He did not speak right away. Instead, he gently knelt down and used his bare hands to smooth the sand that had been trampled. Every motion seemed to soothe not only the earth, but also the pain in the man's heart. Time felt like it had slowed down. The merchant, once screaming, suddenly fell quiet. No one forced him, but the silence of the Zen master softened him. In that moment, something inside him began to crack, not from rejection, but from the unspoken gaze that had reached into the most fragile part of his soul, the fear of loss. the helplessness in the face of life. Your anger cannot bring the goods back. Master Wo finally spoke, his voice as soft as wind through leaves. But it can steal what is left, the peace in your heart. The merchant trembled, eyes red. But, if I do not react, then who am I? He asked, like a child lost in the dark. The master did not answer right away. He simply invited the man to sit beside the garden. He began to tell a story from his younger years, when the library of books he had spent a lifetime writing was burned to ashes in a single night. For 3 days, he too had screamed, cursed, and wanted to blame the universe. But on the 4th morning, amidst the ashes, he saw a small sprout growing, fresh, resilient, as if the earth itself was whispering. True wisdom does not live in paper and ink, but in a calm mind that cannot be burned. Reaction is instinct, he continued, but response is a choice. When I sat among the ashes and realized I still had the ability to write again, to write not from theory, but from real experience, that was the moment I was no longer the man who lost everything, but the man being reborn from loss. The merchant wept. His rage faded, his pain began to melt away. In the silence of the garden, something was understood, not through the mind, but through a deep feeling from within. Master Wo handed him the broken wooden rake. Keep it, he said, as a reminder. The garden may be disturbed, but it can always be restored, if our hands are patient, and our hearts are open enough. The merchant bowed deeply. His face no longer looked like a man who had lost everything, but like someone who had just rediscovered what matters most, himself. Not through possessions, status, or circumstances, but through the power of staying present and steady in the face of what cannot be controlled. The story does not end with the goods being returned, but with the rebirth of a soul once swept away by rage. That is the power of not reacting, a power that is quiet, needs no display, yet strong enough to move even the fiercest storm. The anger in the merchant's heart had not faded, even as the face before him remained still as a glassy lake. Waves of despair rose within him, a fortune built over years stolen in one night. His faith in justice shattered when no one could make things right. And now even the sacred temple said to bring enlightenment offered only silence in the face of his suffering. Master Wo's silence angered him more than any rejection, because he was not just looking for help, he was crying out to be seen, to be understood, to have his pain acknowledged. But when his eyes fell on the image of the old monk gently smoothing the ruined sand garden, something inside began to tremble. It was no longer the fire of blind rage, but a confrontation with something he could not understand. How could someone who had just been disrespected, disrupted, and harmed remain so calm, so quiet, as if nothing that happened had touched him at all? In that moment, time seemed to stop. A gentle breeze stirred the bamboo leaves. Morning birds sang long and clear, and the wooden rake lay quietly at the feet of the merchant, a silent witness to the wordless exchange between two worlds. Finally, Master Wo looked up. His eyes held no sadness, no blame, only a clarity steeped in compassion. He spoke slowly, his warm voice resonating like a bell from afar. If you let anger control you, then you are no different from those who stole your goods. They took your possessions once. But if you let anger and resentment burn through your mind, then you will keep taking away your own peace, again and again. That sentence pierced through the merchant's defenses like an arrow. He froze. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. All his life, people had only responded to him with the same energy he brought: fear, anger, or pity. But here, for the first time, he faced someone who did not react at all, who simply stood as a mirror, clearly reflecting the truth happening within his own heart. "But I have lost everything," he whispered, not in anger, but like a quiet confession. "I have nothing left. My family, my future, everything depended on that shipment. Now it is all gone." Master Wo nodded, as if he had heard that sentence countless times from shattered souls who had come to this place. He shared that there was a time when he too thought he was defined by what he had, the books he had written, the knowledge he had taught, the reputation others admired. But then, one winter night, a small flame from a tipped oil lamp burned down his entire library, the place that held the story of his life. 30 years of work reduced to ash in a single hour. He too had cried, raged, and felt hopeless, until one day, among the ashes, he saw a tiny green sprout pushing up through a crack in the scorched stone. Small, fragile, but reaching for the light. In that moment, he realized wisdom does not live in books, and reputation does not lie in praise. Everything can be lost, but life, the knowing, the seeing, the deep understanding, still remains whole within us, waiting to be rediscovered. The merchant bowed his head and said nothing more. He picked up the wooden rake and carefully held it out to the master. But Master Wo did not take it back. Instead, he smiled, placed his hand gently on the man's hand, and said, "Keep it. Whenever your heart begins to stir like waves, draw a line in the sand, and if it gets ruined, start again. This garden is just like your mind, never permanently broken. It only takes a little presence, a little patience, for peace to return." On the merchant's face appeared an expression that was both unfamiliar and strangely familiar. It was not quite a smile, but a softness in his eyes, a release in his shoulders, a breath that no longer rushed, as if he had finally set down a stone he had been carrying far too long. The monastery returned to its natural stillness. Leaves fell, sunlight rose, and the birds began to sing again. But something had changed irreversibly, not in the surroundings, but in the heart of a man who had just learned that peace does not come from controlling everything. Strength does not come from reacting to everything. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies in not reacting, just breathing, looking deeply, and letting life teach us through what is already happening. High up in the Tibetan mountains, where snow blankets the land year-round and the wind howls like ancient chants of nature, there was a small cave nestled into a rocky cliff, wrapped in silence and time. Inside that cave lived a hermit named Palden, a man who had spent over 30 years meditating, chanting scriptures, and purifying his mind from all worldly illusions. He believed he had risen above all human emotions, that his heart was now like still water, unshakable by anything. Every day passed in the same quiet rhythm, waking before dawn, meditating in the morning light, eating a simple meal of barley and spring water, then returning to deep meditation until dusk. In his mind, human life was the source of all suffering, while solitude among the mountains was the soil in which pure spiritual practice could grow. He told himself, "I have risen above anger, desire, and sorrow. Nothing can disturb me anymore." But then one day, as if destiny had planned a great lesson, a large, wild yak, with matted fur and confused but harmless eyes, wandered into that supposedly perfect world. The animal knew nothing of the spirituality of the cave's occupant, nor did it care about the sacred order of the space. It stormed into the cave, knocked over the clay jar Paulden used to collect morning dew, shattered the precious prayer bell he held dear, and without hesitation, devoured the entire stash of barley he had saved for the coming winter. Everything happened so quickly, like a sudden storm sweeping through a blooming garden. In that instant, Paulden stood frozen, his mind, supposedly disciplined, spiraled into chaos. The calm he had taken pride in shattered like the porcelain jar under the yak's feet. A wave of rage surged from the depths of his being, a place he did not even know still existed within him. He screamed, slammed the ground, grabbed a bamboo stick, and tried to chase the yak out of the cave. His eyes bulged, his breath quickened, his steps frantic, as if he were chasing not just the animal, but all 30 years of spiritual practice crumbling in minutes. When the frightened creature finally fled down the mountain, leaving a wrecked space behind, Paulden collapsed onto the cave floor, head bowed, heart pounding, hands still trembling in disbelief. In the exhaustion that followed the outburst, he realized, all those years, he had not truly practiced, he had only avoided life. The emotions he thought he had conquered had merely been asleep, untouched because nothing had come to awaken them. He had been in an environment too ideal, too pure, too controlled, so much so that he never truly knew if his peace was real. That truth cut through the layers of illusion he had built around himself for decades. But instead of drowning in despair or returning to his old life as a failure, Paulden made a choice that surprised even the most seasoned monks. He left the cave, not to find a quieter place, but to walk down into the valley, into the chaos of human life. He chose the busiest marketplace in the region, a place filled with crying children, shouting vendors, the smell of sweat and flowers. Where imperfection was everywhere, it was there that he began again, not by withdrawing into silence, but by opening his heart in the middle of noise. He stopped trying to control everything, and started watching himself in every moment of discomfort, when pushed, when criticized, when lied to or spoken to rudely. At first, he still felt angry, still felt frustrated, still wanted others to meet his expectations. But slowly, he realized that each rising emotion was not an enemy, but a teacher. Every time his heart was disturbed was a chance to look deeply into an old wound still waiting to heal. In the days that followed, Paulden was no longer a hermit isolated from the world, but a silent practitioner living among it, learning to breathe in the crowd, to let go in the marketplace, and to find stillness not by escaping, but by embracing it all. One day, amidst the noisy market, he saw a shopkeeper shouting at a young assistant for breaking a valuable jar. The boy's face went pale, eyes filled with tears. Paulden stepped forward, gently placed a hand on the shopkeeper's shoulder, and said only one thing: "A broken jar can be replaced, but a heart wounded by fear is much harder to mend." The shopkeeper fell silent, the boy lowered his head, and Paulden smiled, not because he had done something righteous, but because he knew that at last, He had begun to truly live from a place beyond reaction, a place of understanding and love. After many years living quietly among the hustle and bustle of the marketplace, Paulden gradually became a familiar face to merchants, wandering children, and even the roughest individuals. People came to him not because he was a spiritual master, but because they felt a sense of calm simply standing near him. Even if just for a few minutes. He did not preach in public, nor did he scold or instruct anyone. He simply showed up, without judgment, without warnings, without trying to change anyone. In his eyes, everyone had a reason for behaving the way they did. And it was that very presence, silent and steady, like a rock in a stream, that created the space for others to begin seeing themselves more clearly. One morning, as Paulden was sitting beside a small tea stall tucked in a corner of the market, he witnessed a scene that was all too familiar. Yet this time it stirred something deeply within him. A middle-aged man, clearly the owner of a large pottery shop, was yelling furiously at a young boy for dropping a valuable vase. The man's face was flushed red, his arm raised as if ready to strike, while the boy stood silently, head down, shoulders trembling, lips pressed tightly together to hold back tears. No one intervened. Passers-by avoided eye contact. The surrounding vendors remained silent, as if rage had become an ordinary part of life. But Paulden did not stay silent, not because he felt the need to interfere, but because something within him was moved, a kind of love with no name or shape. Only a gentle urging to step forward. He walked over, not fast, not slow, as if each step was placed by the stillness he had cultivated over the years. When he stood just a few feet away from the man, Paulden did not speak great or lofty words. He simply bowed his head slightly, looked directly into the man's burning eyes, and said, "I understand. You are deeply hurt. That vase was valuable. It meant effort, money, trust placed in someone else. But if you let this anger destroy your kindness, then what is lost today is not just the vase, but also the trust of a heart still learning how to grow." His voice was not loud, but it was enough to reach the softest place in the man's heart. The anger seemed to have somewhere to dissolve, not suppressed, not extinguished, but seen and understood. The man hesitated, his expression shifting from aggression to confusion. Then his eyes rested on the boy's face. Perhaps for the first time, he no longer saw a mistake to be punished, but a child trembling in fear. His raised hand slowly lowered. The same hand that was about to strike now reached down to pick up the broken pieces on the ground. No one said another word. Paulden smiled and stepped back, leaving the two of them alone with the precious moment that had just opened, a moment no longer driven by instinctive reaction, but illuminated by new awareness. On his walk back to his lodging, Paulden felt as if a heavy weight he had been carrying since a past life had just been set down. He no longer felt the need to prove his practice, nor to show he had conquered anger. He understood that peace is not something we achieve by forcing the world into silence, but something that arises naturally within when we can stand in the middle of noise without being swept away. A non-reactive mind is not one that is suppressed, it is one that has learned to breathe with everything. And a person who no longer reacts is not indifferent. They are someone who has come to see what truly matters in each moment: presence, understanding, and the ability to choose kindness over habit. beside the ancient meditation hall nestled deep within the misty mountains. There is a stone bench that is always clean, not because someone sweeps it, but because the fallen petals are quietly carried away by the morning breeze before anyone has the chance to touch them. On that bench, in the twilight between day and night, there often appears an old but radiant figure, as if he were the last echo of a time long gone, where language had never been misused and presence held more power than speech. That is Zen Master Jigwan, revered by the monks as a living treasure of wisdom, not because he spoke often, but because his very presence helped others see themselves more clearly. After a long day filled with stories and lessons on non-reaction, the storyteller was led to meet him just as the shadows of dusk reached the tallest trees in the temple courtyard. There was no ceremony, no introduction, only two people sitting side by side in silence, as if both had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Before a single word was spoken, Master Jigwan lifted his gaze to the sky, where the first stars had begun to flicker against the freshly darkened night. Without looking at his companion, he asked gently, "What do you see up there?" The storyteller replied, "The stars, and the darkness between them." He nodded slowly, then asked again, not quite a question, more like an invitation. "Which do you think is more important, the light of the stars, or the space of darkness between them?" The question was not easy to answer. In the silence, the answer rose like a leaf floating to the surface of a lake. Without the darkness, the light of the stars would not stand out. The space between them is what makes them meaningful. The master smiled softly. His eyes were still fixed on the sky above, but his mind felt very near. Exactly. Space is the foundation for all appearances. But humans often look only at what sparkles, what moves, what stands out, and they forget the quiet ground that holds it all. In that moment, the storyteller realized that the lesson of non-reaction was not just about managing emotions or staying calm. It was about recognizing the foundational nature of one's true self, not the surging emotions, not the fleeting thoughts, but the vast space in which all of it appears and disappears. The master turned and looked directly into the eyes of the student. His eyes were deep, carrying no image, only an infinite stillness. He asked, as a gentle reminder, "When you feel angry, or sad, or afraid, does your whole being become that emotion? Or is there a part of you that is simply watching it?" The student remained silent for a long time, then finally spoke in a whisper, as if listening to his own voice for the first time. "There is a part that does not get swept away. That part simply knows." The master nodded, placed his thin hand over his heart, and said, "That is your true self, the space where all experiences come and go. The stillness that nothing can touch. No storm strong enough to shake. The silence between the stars, invisible, unmoving, yet the source of all meaning." The night wind blew gently, causing the high-hanging lanterns to sway softly, as if they too were bowing before a truth just revealed. The storyteller no longer felt the need to ask anything more. There was no sense of awe, no excitement, only a quiet calm spreading throughout the body, like moonlight slowly soaking into stone and soil, as if the mind had finally stopped struggling with life for the right to exist, and realized it had always been here, independent of success, failure, praise, or misunderstanding. Zen Master Jigwan gently touched the student's shoulder, not in a gesture of support, but as if to pass on a quiet certainty. From now on, you no longer need to learn how not to react. Just remember who you are. You are the space that sees, not the things that are happening. As the sound of the temple bell echoed from afar, the storyteller suddenly realized that silence was no longer the absence of sound, but the foundation that holds all the sounds of life. When darkness had fully blanketed the path, the stars shone more clearly in the sky, like thousands of quiet eyes watching each moment of this fleeting world. Master Jigwan stood up slowly and invited the student to walk with him to a small water basin in the center of the monastery courtyard. The water was so clear one could see the pebbles at the bottom, still and reflective like a mirror holding the night sky. He picked up a small pebble, placed it gently in his palm, and held it out in front of the student without saying a word. The gesture, though simple, carried a profound stillness, as if all the teachings passed down through generations now rested in that open hand. After a long silence, the master let the pebble fall into the water. Ripples spread from the point of impact, widening, softening, until the surface returned to stillness once more. When the student looked up, eyes still wide in wonder, the master finally spoke. When something happens, a word, a loss, a sudden change, it is like a pebble falling into the mind. The problem is not the pebble, but the ripples we allow it to create. Most people, when they see the water ripple, panic and stir it up even more, thinking they must do something. But if we simply observe, without interfering, the water will settle on its own. The mind is the same. If you just watch, without reacting, every emotion will eventually fade like those ripples fading out. That sentence was not philosophical, nor did it try to become a universal truth. Yet it brought a rare kind of quiet into the listener's heart, like the air after a soft rain, filled with the scent of damp earth and clear skies. The master bent down, scooped some water in his hand, then let it flow between his fingers back into the basin. He spoke softly. This is the miracle. Nothing truly stays. We think emotions will wound us forever, that memories will haunt us endlessly. But in truth, everything flows away, as long as we do not cling to it. The student remained silent, but within that silence, something was awakening, like a flower bud slowly beginning to open. He had once believed that not reacting meant suppressing, enduring, swallowing pain, or holding back to keep things from falling apart. But now he understood, not reacting meant not clinging. It meant letting things move like water, like wind, like moonlight dissolving on the lake at dawn. In the stillness that blanketed the monastery, Master Jigwan turned to look at the student one last time. His gaze was no longer that of a teacher instructing, but of one passing something on. Reaction, he said, is always a shadow of the past. When you react, you are not living in the present, you are reliving old wounds. A word of criticism today can make you angry, not because of that word, but because of past times when you were insulted, hurt, and never fully healed. That is why reaction is not natural. It is what has not yet been clearly seen. Once you see it, just see it, it can no longer control you. In that vast quiet, his words felt like a single thread, delicate yet strong, connecting past and present, linking the old storms of emotion to the fresh clarity blooming now in the student's heart. The student could find no words. He simply felt lighter, as if he had just laid down something that had clung to him for years without his knowing. The master said nothing more. He walked away, his thin frame steady like an ancient tree that had weathered centuries of wind. The student remained there for a long time, eyes resting on the now still water, heart no longer swayed by waves of emotion, simply receiving life as it flowed through him like a stream. No need to grasp, no need to push, just letting it move as it always has. When he finally turned back toward his room, his steps felt lighter than ever, not because the path had changed, but because the one walking it no longer carried what did not need to be carried. After the conversation under the stars with Master Jigwan, the student did not return to his room right away. He chose instead to sit on the stone bench, still warm from the silent presence of the old master. Around him, the temple bell faded, the wind brushing past the old roof tiles melted into the deep night. The atmosphere thickened like an invisible space inviting him not to think, but to feel. There were no more questions, nothing left to answer, only a quiet presence expanding within him, embracing space, time, and the beliefs he had once clung to as the foundation of who he was. He no longer saw himself as a student who had just asked about peace, about how not to react. It felt instead like he had become the silence itself, the knowing that simply witnesses as emotions slowly dissolve like morning mist under the rising sun. Understanding did not come through reasoning or analysis. It entered like a small stream soaking into dry roots, quietly, patiently, without haste. For the first time in his life, he saw clearly that he did not need to become someone else, did not need to achieve anything, or go anywhere to find peace. That peace had always been here, untouched by the world, waiting only for him to stop long enough to notice. In the past, when he tried to meditate, tried not to react, tried to control the mind, all of it came from desire, the desire to transcend, to become better, deeper, more peaceful. But in this moment, when all striving fell away, when nothing more was wanted or sought, he saw that peace is never ahead of us. It only appears when there is nothing left to hold on to. The world around him had not changed, the starlit sky, the silhouettes of trees, the wind, but it all seemed to carry new meaning. Each leaf gently swaying on its branch seemed to whisper a message without words. Nothing needs fixing. Nothing is wrong to be corrected. Nothing is lost that must be retrieved. In that awareness, even the painful memories that once left him confused, that once triggered blind reactions, now appeared like old winds, having passed, leaving no mark. He did not need to fight them. He did not need to hold or push them away. They were simply movements within a larger space, a space he had just touched, just returned to, just realized was him. In that moment, he deeply understood the final words Zen Master Jigwan had spoken before leaving. Non-reaction is not about trying to be unmoved. It is about returning to the part of you that has never been moved by anything. That sentence, which at first had sounded like a philosophical idea, now became a living truth, needing no explanation, no proof, because it was alive in every breath, every heartbeat, every smallest movement that he no longer felt separate from. That night, the student did not sleep. He simply sat in the temple courtyard beneath the silent stars, like a speck of dust no longer burdened by questions of origin or destination. simply existing within the infinite, where there is no reaction, no question, no questioner, only space, stillness, and the eternal awareness. In a fertile plain where rice fields stretched all the way to the horizon, there stood a small temple tucked behind a row of green bamboo. There, Zen Master Moen had lived nearly his entire life in quiet humility. Unlike many spiritual teachers surrounded by disciples and ritual, Master Moen chose to live as an ordinary villager, waking early each day to sweep the courtyard, carry water, cook, and tend to the small vegetable garden behind the temple. People rarely heard him give Dharma talks. He never stood on a stage to preach. Yet no one in the region failed to respect him, for every action he made carried a strange stillness. A silent energy that made even the most short-tempered slow down in his presence. Stories of Master Moen spread across the land, not because he did great things, but because he did small things with his whole presence. One day, a young man from a distant town came seeking him, his face full of determination and his voice firm, like someone who had read dozens of books on meditation and non-doing. He declared that he understood all the concepts, that he was practicing Wu Wei, doing without leaving traces, acting without ego, unattached to outcomes. Master Moen simply smiled and said nothing. He invited the young man to have lunch with him, a humble meal of rice, boiled greens, and a small bowl of soy sauce. Throughout the meal, the master did not say a word about non-doing. He just served the guest, poured water when the cup was empty, and quietly cleaned up when the meal ended. The kitchen was so quiet one could hear the spoon gently touch the bowl. The young man began to feel uneasy. He wondered if this was some kind of hidden teaching. Finally, he asked, "Master, could you please explain to me what true non-doing is?" The master set down the towel he had used to dry the bowls and replied slowly with a question. "Did you see the lunch we just had?" The young man nodded. The master continued, "During that meal, what did you see me do?" The young man replied, "You cooked, you served, you cleaned, everything was complete." The master smiled gently. "So, was that action, or non-action?" The young man fell silent, caught between two thoughts. After a moment of reflection, he said, "It was action, but there was no one doing it." The master nodded, his eyes not triumphant, only soft and warm like the afternoon light falling on old bricks. Exactly. Non-doing does not mean doing nothing. It means not being driven by ego while doing. When hands wash dishes not for praise, not out of fear of blame, not to leave a mark, just because the dishes need to be clean. When we cook simply because someone needs to eat. In that moment, something melted inside the young man, not theory, not knowledge, but the very urge to prove himself dissolved. He had thought non-doing was a state one reached after long years of practice. But now he saw that maybe non-doing is the most natural thing of all. When the mind no longer wants anything for itself. When every task is done wholeheartedly, but there is no one inside trying to own it. That feeling brought both relief and a kind of quiet sadness, because all this time, he had been trying so hard to not try, while that could only happen when there was no one left trying. The next morning, Master Moen invited the young man to help pick vegetables. Under the early sun, they bent over rows of greens, gently removing wilted leaves, trimming the damaged ones, and saying nothing, just listening to birds, to wind, to the breath of roots beneath the soil. No lecture was needed, no explanation was given. Every movement that morning was already a lesson. As they returned, the young man bowed in gratitude, not for something the master had taught in words, but for what he had not tried to teach. His steps were no longer hurried like when he had first arrived. No longer chasing understanding, no longer eager for answers. Inside him now was only one clear thought, like sunlight refracted through a single dewdrop. To live with non-doing is not to avoid action, but to act in a way that leaves no trace in the heart. Like a breath passing through, like sunlight warming the ground, like the master's hands folding a dish towel, simple, complete, needing no audience. Before the young man left, Master Moen handed him a small parcel wrapped in banana leaf. Inside were a few dried soybeans and a tiny slip of paper with 4 words written on it. Act as if not acting. There was no further explanation, no Dharma teaching. The master turned back into the kitchen, quietly lighting the stove as if no visitor had ever come that morning. The young man stood there for a moment, looking at the packet in his hand, and felt that what he had received was greater than everything he had ever learned from books, the things he once thought were deep, the truths he once believed unshakable. The morning air was clear. The scent of smoke blended with moist earth. A rooster crowed somewhere in the distance, marking the rhythm of a new day. The scene was unchanged, but to someone who had just passed through a silent encounter, everything seemed filled with a strange new beauty, as if every speck of dust, every leaf, every footstep of the master was quietly whispering, "You do not need to do anything to become. Just be fully present in what you are doing." On his way home, the young man stopped at a roadside tea stall, where an older woman was busy pouring tea for customers, wiping tables, setting chairs, and occasionally soothing a child playing nearby. No one paid attention to her. No one praised or admired her. Yet her eyes held no trace of weariness or complaint. Every gesture was full, precise, nothing rushed, nothing wasted. Suddenly he saw something in her that reminded him of Master Moen, a peace that did not come from circumstances, but from the way she met each moment. At that moment, he understood that non-doing does not belong only in temples. It does not require hours of meditation or reading countless scriptures. It is present in a cup of tea poured without waiting for thanks, in a table wiped clean without expecting to be noticed. If a person can live each moment like that, not pulled by the past, not haunted by the future, then every action becomes non-doing. Whether it is cooking, gardening, or washing dishes. When he returned home, the young man took out the piece of paper the master had given him. This time, he did not read it with a mind searching for meaning, but with a heart ready to listen. Act as if not acting. Those 4 words echoed through him like a distant temple bell ringing in the silence of the night. He placed the soybeans on the table, made a simple pot of porridge, and invited his parents to eat with him, not out of duty, not to prove he had learned something, but simply because that was what the moment asked for. Every motion of scooping, serving, clearing was done slowly, as if he were living within each fleeting second of life, where every act was a nameless meditation. He no longer thought of the Zen master as someone who preached wisdom, but as a mirror, reflecting what had always lived in his own heart, just waiting for a silence deep enough to be seen. In the days that followed, the young man sought out no other teachers. He no longer took notes on lectures. No longer forced himself to meditate in rigid postures. No longer questioned what was right or wrong. He began tending to the garden behind his house, listening to the sound of rain falling on the metal roof, cooking meals for his younger sister after school, chatting with the elderly neighbor during his afternoon walks. Every action, no matter how small, became an opportunity to return to himself, without needing to try to not react. Because reaction no longer arose when the heart was no longer lost in craving or resistance. Wu Wei, as the Zen master once taught, was not some mystical state, but the most natural and wholehearted way to live, where one no longer strives to become someone else, but simply is oneself in every breath, every movement, every glance filled with kindness. Deep within a remote forest, where a red dirt path wound through thick hills and the only companions were the rustling stream and the songs of wild birds, there lived a lone woodcutter in a small leaf-roofed hut. He was neither old nor young. No one knew his real name, they simply called him the Old Woodcutter. A name both familiar and distant, much like the life he had chosen. Every morning, he carried his axe up the mountain, searching for dead or lightning-struck trees, chopping them into pieces and carrying them down to the market to sell. People often saw him pass by, thin but strong, his eyes deep and quiet, never hurried despite the long journey, never complaining despite harsh sun or pouring rain. Many said he had the air of someone who had endured great loss. But no one dared to ask, for there was something in his gaze, so still, so deep, as if all the answers rested at the bottom of a stream where no ordinary person could reach. One morning, before the light fully broke, he climbed the mountain as usual, carrying his old axe, its blade already chipped. At one slope, he stopped beside a pine tree long dead, its bark cracked, its branches just blackened bones. He set the axe down and closed his eyes for a while, taking a deep breath as if saying goodbye to the tree before parting with it. As he raised the axe and struck the first blow, a small shard of steel flew off the blade, spinning into the air before falling into a rocky crevice. The woodcutter sat down, touched the chipped edge, and said nothing. Slowly, he stood and walked toward the rocks to find the missing piece. Over 30 minutes passed before he found it, a small, rust-stained fragment lying among sharp stones. He held it in his palm as if cradling a piece of his own heart, not for its material value, but because it had witnessed countless seasons of toil, and was part of a blade he had never used in anger. A young man happened to witness this scene and approached, asking, "It's just an old piece of an axe. Why go to all that trouble? Wouldn't buying a new one be easier?" The woodcutter did not answer right away. He wiped the metal clean with the hem of his shirt, placed it back in his pouch, and said slowly, "People often think that when something breaks, you toss it. When something is lost, you replace it. When it's old, you throw it out. But when you've lived long enough with something, every crack and worn edge stops being a flaw, it becomes a memory. A lesson. This axe taught me how to fell trees without hurting the soil, how to strike without breaking my back, how to rest before I am spent. If I were to discard it just because of one broken piece, I would be discarding myself, the years I lived with it." The young man had no words. In the long silence, he realized something no one had ever taught him. That resilience is not the power to resist time. but the ability to welcome time as part of oneself. The woodcutter did not cling to the axe out of attachment, but because he had lived with it mindfully. Each strike was not just to make a living, but to learn how to live. The story of the chipped axe was not a moral tale, but a living testament to a quiet wisdom, the wisdom of someone who had learned not to react to loss, not to abandon what was imperfect, not to chase the new just to escape the old. As evening fell, the woodcutter continued his work, chopping wood with a calmness that was almost strange. Each swing of the axe had its own rhythm, not too fast, not too forceful, leaving no trace of aggression in the wood. The young man did not walk away. He stood there for a long time, as if witnessing an ancient ritual, where man did not dominate nature, nor did nature dominate him, but both lived together through understanding and humility. In that moment, he understood why some chose to live simply among the trees, not to escape life, but to hear it more clearly in its most delicate movements, where even a strike of an axe could be a prayer, and a broken piece could be an invitation back to awareness. After witnessing the woodcutter's quiet work that evening, the young man no longer just watched. He stepped forward and asked to help. He was not sure why. Perhaps it was a quiet impulse, or a natural respect for the man before him, whose every motion felt like a reverent bow to Mother Earth. The woodcutter did not refuse, nor did he express joy. He simply nodded and pointed to a large log he had already cut down. "If you like," he said, "try splitting that one." The young man picked up the axe, took a deep breath, and struck hard. The blade sank in but only created a shallow crack. He tried again, and again, sweat soaking his back. But the log remained firm, as if silently teaching a lesson that brute force could not understand. The woodcutter stepped over, gently took the axe, turned the log slightly so the grain aligned with the blade, then struck, not hard, but with precision and rhythm. After just 3 swings, the log split cleanly, revealing a bright, fragrant heartwood. There was no boasting in his motion, no hint of demonstration. He simply set the axe down and looked at the young man with soft eyes. When you try too hard, the mind becomes impatient. Even the sharpest blade, if misaligned, brings harm to both the wood and the one who swings it. Work, like life, is not about force. It is about listening. Every tree has its grain, and every person too. Reaction often comes from forgetting this, forgetting that some things do not need force, only understanding. The sunlight tilted down, long golden rays filtering through the trees like trails of time passing by but never gone. The young man no longer felt ashamed of failing, nor driven by a need to prove himself. What remained was a deep stillness, a peace he had never known, as if he had just shed an invisible armor worn for far too long. He looked at the chipped axe lying quietly beside the woodcutter, and no longer saw it as damaged, but as a history, a witness to a life lived without resistance, without regret. When he asked, "Have you ever been angry?" the woodcutter did not answer right away. He looked up at the high canopy, where a few dry leaves were falling slowly in the light breeze, and finally said softly, "Of course, but I have learned that anger is like swinging an axe in the wrong direction, all effort, going nowhere, and more likely to break both the handle and your own heart." That night, the young man did not return home. He asked to stay in the woodcutter's small hut, The humble shelter contained nothing more than a worn mat, a clay stove, and a few utensils hanging on the wooden wall, each object infused with the breath of years distilled. There were no books, no Dharma talks, yet every item in the hut seemed to tell a story of endurance, of simplicity, and above all, of complete presence in every moment. Before sleep, he lay listening to the sound of wind through the forest, the murmuring of insects, and slowly closed his eyes with a feeling like he had just returned to an ancient place his soul had long yearned for. In that moment, he understood that the lesson from the axe was not just about a tool, it was about a way of life. A life that does not break things, does not demand, does not force the world to change just to suit us. True non-reaction, he saw, is not about passivity, but about a deep knowing what is truly worth giving our heart to, and what is best released gently, like the final stroke of the axe on a log already ready to part. As the first light of dawn touched the mountain slope, the young man woke to the crackling sound of fire in the stove. The scent of wood smoke slipping through the hut's wooden seams. The woodcutter had already risen, boiling water in an old iron kettle with a chipped handle. His eyes still held the same calmness as the evening before, as if no night had passed at all. The young man sat up, arms folded, looking around the small hut, where nothing was excessive or missing. Nothing polished, yet nothing broken without meaning. There was a strange beauty present, a beauty not of appearance, but of sincerity, seen in every scratch on the chopping board, in the chipped rice bowl, in the axe resting in the corner still echoing yesterday's lessons. In that quiet moment, he no longer felt like a guest, or even a student seeking understanding. He felt like part of the great silence the woodcutter had lived with for many years. After a simple breakfast of thin porridge and sesame salt, the woodcutter took his axe outside and began sharpening it on the large stone beside the hut. His movements were slow, patient, not hurried, not trying to finish quickly. With each stroke across the stone, he watched closely, as if conversing with the tool that had walked through so many seasons with him. The young man sat beside him without saying a word. After a while, he asked, "Do you ever feel bored? Living like this, day after day, all the same?" The woodcutter did not look up. He smiled faintly, eyes still fixed on the edge of the axe. He answered in a soft voice, "People get bored not because life is the same, but because the mind is no longer present with what is happening. The newness does not lie in doing something different, but in truly seeing what is." His words did not sound like a lesson, only like a drop of water falling onto a still pond, but inside the young man, they sent a quiet ripple of awakening. He looked at the woodcutter's hands, thick with calluses, small cracks that did not seem to cause pain or shame, and then at his own hands, clean and pale, used to holding pens and typing keyboards, now feeling strangely misplaced in this forest. He did not ask anything more. He simply sat still, letting the woodcutter's every movement seep in, like rain into soil, slow, unforced. When the axe was finally sharpened, the woodcutter stood, slung it over his shoulder, and turned with a gentle nod. "You may walk with me, but do not help. Just walk beside me. Seeing is enough." It was not rejection, it was a deeper invitation. An invitation to walk without the burden of doing, without the urge to prove oneself useful, but to learn how to be completely present with each step. That entire morning, they said nothing. They walked through forest paths, past fallen trunks, over dry creek beds, across rocky patches where grass grew between stones. Every time the woodcutter chopped a branch, the young man watched not just the act itself, but the breath, the rhythm of movement, the pause between strikes. He realized that a kind of language was being passed down, not through words, not through books, but through awakened silence, where each action carried the presence of the whole person. When they carried the wood down the mountain, the weight on the woodcutter's back did not bend his shoulders or make him pant. Each step seemed as if he carried nothing, every motion free from clinging. That evening, when the young man said goodbye to return home, the woodcutter did not walk him out, did not offer advice. He simply nodded, his gaze steady, as if to say, "You have seen. The rest is yours." The young man bowed deeply, no longer carrying any questions. As he walked down the mountainside, he did not feel like someone leaving, but like someone finally returning to a self no longer rushed, no longer afraid of mistakes, no longer needing to prove understanding. He knew life ahead would still bring challenges. Reactions would still rise. There would still be anger, frustration, but now, he carried an axe in his heart, not to cut trees, but to sever old patterns, to pause before striking, to live like the woodcutter's axe, precise, never harsh, deep but never scarring, strong enough to split wood, gentle enough not to wound the earth. At the foot of the hill, beside an ancient temple nestled among trees, villagers often saw a familiar sight: a blind girl sitting at the temple gate every morning, fingers quietly turning a wooden rosary, face always tilted toward the sun though she could not see its light. Everyone knew she lived with her frail grandmother in a hut near the bamboo forest, walking silently each day to the temple to listen to the bell, then sitting still, asking for nothing, noticing no one. Not far from her, at that same gate, sat a ragged beggar beneath a tree, holding a chipped bowl, eyes following the flow of passers-by but carrying no light, perhaps missing hope, perhaps missing life itself. For many months, they sat like that every day, not speaking, not asking, just silently coexisting like two nameless stones by a stream. Each seemed like a closed door. The girl could not see the world, and the man no longer seemed to want to. But one morning, in a gentle rain and chill mist, the beggar began coughing harshly, trembling from the cold. The girl, hearing the coughing, slowed her fingers on the rosary. Then, from her coat pocket, she pulled out an old cloth and silently placed it beside him before returning to her usual seat. The man looked at the cloth, then at the girl, and for the first time in months, he felt something rise behind his eyes, not emotion, not pity, but a fragile awakening, like a drop of water touching parched soil. He said nothing. She did not turn back. But from that day on, the beggar brought that cloth with him each morning, not just for warmth, but as a trace of someone who had once seen him, not with eyes, but with something deeper. Time passed and seasons changed. The trees around the temple began losing their leaves and the air grew colder. One morning, the little blind girl did not come. The beggar sat alone, holding the cloth in his hands, feeling a deep emptiness. He waited through the morning, then afternoon, but the familiar small figure never appeared. The next day, He left the tree where he sat and for the first time climbed the hill toward the bamboo forest. Villagers whispered as they saw him pass. Perhaps he is searching for her. Finally, he reached the small hut, where the grandmother sat quietly beside the frail body of her granddaughter. Hands still clasped around the rosary. Lips still curved in a faint smile. As if hearing the temple bell in her final dream. The beggar did not cry. He merely sat down, placed the cloth gently back into her cold hands, and bowed deeply in silent farewell. From that day on, he stopped sitting at the temple gate. He asked to remain, sweeping the courtyard, carrying water, tending the vegetable garden behind the temple. No one chased him away. No one questioned him. Each morning, when the temple bell rang, he stood quietly, fingers turning the wooden prayer beads the girl once held, not to pray, but to remember that there is a light that requires no eyes to see, compassion that needs no words to speak, and a lesson that needs no sermon or scripture yet touches the deepest heart of a person. Once lost in despair, he became someone living in awareness, not because he understood much, but because a blind girl taught him how to truly see with the heart. The story of the blind girl and the beggar was never recorded in books, nor mentioned in sermons. But all who visited that temple felt a gentle absence. That early morning bell no longer echoed in their hearts. The beggar had changed. He no longer sat with tired eyes and a bowl in hand. Each morning he rose early, cleaned the courtyard, refreshed the water jars, collected fallen leaves at the gate, and sat quietly to hear the bell, listening as if to the heartbeat of someone long gone. One day, the elderly abbot quietly said while watering the garden with him, "Some people do not become monks. Yet their hearts follow the way. Some teachings require no words, yet awaken a lifetime." The beggar bowed deeply, water dipper in hand, but inside him stirred like a lake touched by a falling leaf. That day after lunch, he returned to the tree where he once begged, the place that had witnessed his spiritual paralysis for so many years. On the old earth, he set a smooth stone and carved a single small word with a knife: "See." No one asked why he chose that word, yet from that day forward, each passer-by slowed down, looked at the stone, and felt something awaken within, an unspoken word, an act of kindness unoffered, a gaze that once passed without truly seeing. In the soft sunlight filtering through the forest overhead, that stone did not shine. It did not stand out. But it remained, an anchor of awareness reminding people that in the flow of life, what matters is not how much we do or how far we go, but whether we have truly seen someone. Whether we have been fully present with another through the heart. When asked why he never spoke of the blind girl, why he never retold the story as a lesson in kindness or enlightenment, he softly replied, "Some things become sermons when spoken and lose their true breath. I do not tell it because I do not want to fix it into a story. I live it every day." Those who heard him at first were surprised, but soon they understood. Some losses are not for regret, but reminders. Some moments need not linger, yet they are deep enough to change how one's heart views the world thereafter. In the spring following, the temple held a lantern festival. As candles were floated on the pond, the beggar, no longer a beggar, released a small lantern shaped like a white lotus. He wrote no wish inside, no name. He placed only a string of old rosewood prayer beads. When the flame touched the water, the light shimmered. Then the lantern drifted away, carrying a part of his life that had once been buried in despair, but awakened by the unseen hand of a child who saw deeper than sight could reach. Those around watched the lantern float and did not know why their hearts tightened. They simply felt something being cleansed, a nameless sorrow, a trust quietly growing in silence. From that moment, the beggar was no longer called by his old name. He was known as the gatekeeper of light. For each dawn he lit a small lantern at the temple entrance, a simple light, yet bright enough to let travelers know someone there was awake, keeping watch over the invisible yet vital things: compassion, gratitude, and that seeing which needs no eyes. The villagers say it was the blind girl who brought him home, not back to the temple, but back to himself, a return needing no road, no map, just a silent gesture made without self, and a heart open without walls. In the late afternoon, wind passing through pine trees along the hillside, an old soldier walked slowly down the red earth path that led to the ancient temple he once visited in youth. His coat frayed at the shoulder, shoes dust-caked, his gait no longer strong as before, but in each step lay something heavier than his old pack, greater than battles endured, a silence so deep it bore witness to too much loss that he had no words left to share. Decades in the army, he had crossed borders, survived life and death lines, buried comrades gone without return. Yet through all those fiercest wars, one sound always stayed with him: the temple bell in his homeland, ringing at dawn over hills and valleys, clear and gentle, like a fragile thread keeping a heart from turning to stone. Now, having left the forces, his body worn, he returned, not seeking what was lost, but to hear that bell once more, to see if it still rang as before, to feel whether his heart still knew how to awaken. Under the dim gray dawn, the venerable abbot, the elderly monk whose eyes had long since lost their sharpness though his hearing remained acute, opened the creaking wooden gate without hesitation. When the old soldier tapped gently, the abbot neither asked who he was nor demanded an explanation. He invited him inside, quietly brewed a pot of hot tea, then placed before him a small, white porcelain cup with a subtle crack at the rim. The two sat in silence. All that could be heard was the steady drip of tea into the cup. Then nothing, as if no tea had ever been poured. The soldier noticed how little had changed in the temple: moss-covered roof tiles, pitted courtyard bricks bearing time's imprint, the Bodhi tree still shedding leaves like it had on the day he left. Only his heart, now returned, felt different. When the tea turned cold, he finally spoke one sentence: "May I still strike the bell at dawn?" The abbot nodded silently and smiled, as if he already understood the true reason for his return. Some wounds are healed not through words, but by a timely bell. The next day, before dawn arose, the soldier woke. He sat quietly on a stone platform in a corner of the courtyard. No one called him or reminded him. Yet he remembered that moment clearly: the first light of morning cresting the mountain, the school day bell ringing out slow and longing, awakening not only the world but worn souls. As the bell tolled, he closed his eyes, sat upright, hands resting on his knees like a salute, but now without rifle or command. Only a heart trembling faintly after years of shutdown. In the bell's resonance, He heard no one but himself, a scorching youth. Faces lost in war. Dreams of survival when death seemed certain. They appeared, not repeating. Not blaming, like clouds drifting across the sky. Dissolving one by one. When the sound faded, a single drop rolled down his cheek. No one saw it, not even him, because it was not a tear, but something deeper. A piece of stone in his soul that had softened. In the days that followed, he asked to stay at the temple for a while. He did not shave his head, did not take vows, nor don saffron robes. He rose before dawn each morning to help tend the hearth, carry water, chop firewood, and tend the plants. No one told him what to do, but he always knew. Perhaps those years bearing arms had disciplined him in silent observation and devoted service. Yet unlike the military, here he acted not out of duty or orders, but out of the simple knowing that each task affirmed his true presence, not for anyone else's approval, but to know that his heart still beat, not for battle, but because peace had taken root within each moment. On some mornings, when the bell tolled, he stood beneath a tree, gaze lifted skyward, not dwelling on past or future, only knowing that in that still space between heaven and earth, there's nothing to speak or hold, everything was already right as it was. On the day of departure, he left the temple without offering an address or promising to return. Before leaving, he asked permission to strike the great bronze bell himself. The abbot bowed and withdrew, allowing him to stand alone before that ancient gong, older than any of their lives. When he lifted the heavy mallet, his hand did not shake. There was no fear in his heart. The bell sounded, not sharp as gunfire, not violent as a bomb's blast, but the sound of a human heart that had weathered storms, whole, complete, and serene. In that moment, he was no longer a soldier, no longer marked by war, but a voice in the bell, a resonance of awakening, having finally touched the realm of tranquility. After that final toll, as sunlight lanced over the hillside, he descended from the temple in silence. No one came to bid farewell, and no gaze lingered, but somehow in the breeze, something gentle followed his every step. From the ancient roof above, the bell itself remained quiet, yet it echoed somewhere in his chest, as if he carried nothing but a sound that would not fade, a resonance opening a portal through layers of dusted years. Along the road to the nearby town, he encountered no familiar faces. No one recognized the salt and pepper man who had once stormed battlefields. He felt no sadness or regret. Instead, he smiled when children laughed in the golden sunshine. Their clear, unrestrained joy made his heart feel like soil after a long drought, fragile cracks softened by rain. Newly alive, that afternoon, upon arrival at his modest home at the village entrance, he took from his pocket an old, frayed piece of paper. On it, his fallen comrade had written this message during their final battle: "If you survive, live like a bell, unhurried, unafraid." Needing no one's listening, he had carried that note for over 20 years. But its meaning finally revealed itself on his return. Sitting alone in his quiet room, sunlight filtering across the window casting leaf shadows on the walls, he realized that his heart was no longer constricted by memory, not because the past changed, but because he had learned to stand within it, unconsumed, like a bell, present, echoing outward, but bearing no weight. The following day, he walked to the riverside where his camp had once stood. now overgrown with reeds. He dug a small hole beneath a tree's stump and buried his old medal, presented once during an honor ceremony he never attended, because he had doubted what they called glory. After burying it, he stood up, dusted his hands, feeling unburdened, as though returning something no longer needed to the earth. This act was not rejection of his past, but his gratitude, not holding it, nor clinging, nor demanding it define him. Over time, the villagers grew accustomed to seeing the man walking through the morning mist or sitting quietly by the riverbank. He did nothing remarkable, only sometimes smiled at playing children in the sand. When asked how he made a living, he simply replied, "I breathe." At first that answer seemed like a joke, but anyone who sat beside him long enough sensed its deeper truth. He did nothing to stand out. Yet his presence compelled others to slow their breath, to place hands on their hearts, and ask, is this still beating for something genuine, or just beating out of habit? One afternoon, a child sat beside him and asked, "Why are you so quiet and yet so happy?" He gazed gently at the child, as calm as a still lake, and said, "Because I have heard the voice within me, I no longer need to speak it." One autumn, as leaves turned golden and the wind carried distant eucalyptus scents, the old soldier passed away in his sleep on a modest hammock beneath the porch. Neighbors found him the next morning, face serene as if dreaming the lightest dream, no pain, no struggle, no sadness. They said few deaths were so complete, as though he had fulfilled the journey of return, not only to the temple, but to himself. His funeral was quiet, unadorned, with just a few villagers, some temple novices, and the faint toll of the bell echoing as the coffin lid was closed. In the autumn breeze that day, the bell rang once more, either farewell, or perhaps a new beginning, where the soldier had finally laid down his burdens and melted into the boundless silence of earth and sky. A few weeks after the soldier had passed, the abbot of the hilltop temple quietly climbed the mountain. He carried a small cloth bag containing a few white stones, a handful of incense ash, and a small bronze handbell with a chipped corner, once hung at the gate of the meditation chamber for decades before being taken down due to age. No one knew why he went, and no one asked. Those who knew him understood that every step of the old monk carried a purpose beyond words. At the spot beneath the tree where the soldier had buried his medal, the monk placed the bag down and sat in silence for a long time, as though conversing with an old friend now carried by the wind. Late afternoon light stretched across the ground as he formed the white stones into the shape of a simple lotus flower, then sprinkled incense ash at its center, gently scattering it into the earth. Finally, he raised the small bell, gently shook it so that it emitted a deep, muted tone, softly resonating like a memory, then bowed his head deeply, eyes closed, offering a silent ode meant only for the one who learned to stillness. The soldier left no will and had no close family. Yet those who had known him came by, each bringing a small object, an old scarf, a worn book, a handful of soil from the temple grounds, and placed these around the tree, as though building an unspoken shrine. No photographs, no gravestone, only on the trunk, carved by a small knife, the final bell tolls when heart returns. None claimed authorship of the words, yet everyone believed it was what he would have wanted. From then on, That tree by the river where he was honored became a pilgrimage site for those whose hearts still carried storms. They sat in silence, not seeking advice, not longing to be heard, just being still as the soldier once was, hoping one day to hear their own inner bell, deep enough to dissolve all noise. A boy who had dropped out of school after his parents divorced began wandering to that tree, at first out of curiosity, then staying longer each day. One rainy afternoon, he sat under the soaked branches, looked at the inscription on the trunk, and began to sob uncontrollably. No one understood why he cried, but afterward, he returned to school and enrolled again. And each afternoon he came back to the tree, holding a small notebook, sometimes writing, sometimes closing his eyes and exhaling. Villagers began calling the place Silent Bell Hill, where there was no actual bell. But those who stayed there long enough said they could hear a distant, gentle sound, not in their ears, but in their hearts. Years later, the local authorities erected a simple memorial plaque there. It bore no name, no military record, only 8 engraved words: one soldier, one bell toll, one life of silence. No one knew who wrote it, but everyone felt it was the most fitting tribute. For the soldier did not seek honor through monuments. He lived and died like an unspoken prayer, a presence so deep it invited even those unacquainted with silence to sit down and listen. Early one morning in a poor forest border village, a mother carried 2 heavy water containers from the well on her slender shoulders. Stepping steadily along the uneven dirt path that bore decades of wear. Her child had never cried. From birth, the child was silent, as though the first cry had never been heard. Some said the child was mute. Others said it bore ancient karma, but the mother did not believe that. For whenever she gently touched its cheek or softly sang a lullaby, she saw sparks flicker in the child's eyes, tiny awakenings. Their small thatched house sat among banana trees and a few vegetable beds. There was nothing of value except a shaky bamboo chair and a shared wooden bowl. Every morning, the mother fetched water, cooked, then worked in the fields. In the evening, she washed clothes by the trough while the child played silently on an old mat, no sound. No laughter, not even a tear. One day heavy rain flooded their courtyard. The mother slipped fetching water, struck her shoulder on a stone, and collapsed in the rain, unable to stand. Hours passed without notice, neighbors absorbed in each day's struggle. The child waited at the doorway, clutching the scarf the mother used to tie her hair, its eyes fixed on the muddy slope. Wind rattled, rain drummed on the roof, but the child remained immobile, as if sculpted in stone, eyes having learned to wait since in the womb. Only when the sky cleared did a villager passing by find the mother lying lifeless by the road. Clothes drenched, body curled from the cold. She was carried home and placed on a bed. They prepared ginger water, rubbed her hands and feet. The child was brought close, expressionless, until the little fingers touched the bruise on her mother's shoulder, and the child trembled. 2 silent tears slipped down, no sobs, no sound, like mountain streams that had been dammed now finding release. Witnesses fell silent. Nobody said, finally cried. They saw it was not the first cry delayed, but pain held so long now spilling in silence. The mother remained unconscious. When she woke the next day, the first thing she saw were her child's eyes, wet but bright, the look saying, "Mother, You are alive. I will no longer stay silent." From that day on, the child still did not speak much, but began to smile softly. Point to the well when mother prepared to fetch water. Sit by the washing basin and gently pat the bathwater as if sharing the burden. At mealtime, the child placed the first piece of vegetables in the mother's bowl before eating its own portion. No one taught or forced it. The gentle flow of love quietly seeped into every gesture. Teaching the child to speak through acts, to love without words, the mother, though still healing from pain, glowed more brightly than ever, because a child's gaze free from coldness made even the world bearable. Each evening, she sat with the child in front of their porch, watching golden sunlight drape the banana leaves. She told stories with no beginning or end, about a father the child never knew, about her childhood dream of painting, about once wanting to become a nun but leaving it half done for a promise that remained unfulfilled. When asked why she told stories to a child who did not answer, she would smile softly like the breeze and reply, "They hear with their heart." Just as I once heard the Buddha's voice while carrying water over hills. Those words made people no longer see her as a poor burdened woman, but as a silent practitioner, bearing in her life not only water, but lifetimes of suffering transmuted into patience. The child, who later grew up neither famous nor wealthy nor prominent, gained something deeper. Anyone who met the child found them likable, accessible, because in their silence lived something real, an authenticity born from a cry no one taught, a gaze needing no interpretation. From a stormy afternoon when a little heart first cracked open into love. Many years later, the mother's hair had turned silver, and she lived with her grown son in a new house built of pine wood with red-tiled roofs, not leaky like in old times, but the old well at the village entrance still stood. And the red dirt path she had carried water along for seasons remained etched with time, like the wrinkles on her gentle face. Each morning, she rose at dawn, brewed a small pot of tea, and swept the porch, not out of necessity, but because a lifelong habit had become a form of silent meditation in daily life. Her son, still quiet and reserved as ever, had grown into the region's most beloved carpenter. His creations were simple yet sturdy, never ornate, never gilded or lacquered, pure in their rustic strength. Just like the way he carried himself in the world, quietly anchored, without seeking recognition. Once, a villager asked him, "Why do people never see you angry or complaining?" He simply smiled and ran his hand across a scratch on a wood plank, saying, "The tree hurts but does not cry out." My mother lived like that. The villager, hearing this, could say nothing further. How could one argue with such profound silence? During village festivals or full moon ceremonies, mother and son were always present, not to show off, but to carry water, to build fires, to arrange chairs for the elderly, to clean up after the meal. These small tasks were taken for granted, unnoticed, but if missing, everything became disordered. After their work, the mother would rest under the mango tree in the front yard, wipe sweat from her brow with an old cloth, and look up at the sky as though conversing with something beyond the world. One oppressive summer, the mother had a high fever that lingered for days. Day and night, her son stayed by her side, changing her towels, boiling water, never leaving her. She remained unconscious for 3 days, barely eating, Occasionally her shaky lips whispered names he had never heard, perhaps his father's name, or others long gone whom only her heart remembered. At dawn on the fourth day, before the roosters crowed, she opened her eyes and squeezed his hand, smiling as she once did, then whispered, "You have learned to cry. Now I can rest in peace." His gaze softened like a still lake in a breeze. He said nothing, shed no tears, but his eyes glistened as if touched by the gentlest wind. He remained beside her until her final breath faded into the void like wind through grass. Her funeral was quiet, unadorned. Only a few villagers who knew her. Some children she had once taught to carry water or offered a cake when their mothers were away. Her son personally built her coffin from jackfruit wood she had once favored, no polish. Just smooth plains, with one carved word on the lid. Listen. That word was not meant for others to read, but for him to remember that his mother had lived a life of listening to water echo over mountain walls, absorbing his silent sorrow, sensing winds whispering unseen truths. After the funeral, he stayed in the village. He did not erect a grand tombstone. Instead, he planted a Bodhi tree by her grave and sat there each day, bringing their shared wooden bowl and placing it before the marker, sitting still for long hours. Villagers often found him there at dawn, doing nothing but sitting silently as if conversing with her, not in words, but with memory. When children passed by, he would call them for candy, then ask, "Do you know how to listen?" When puzzled children shook their heads, he would smile and say, "When you stay quiet for a long time, you hear things no one ever teaches." Though simple, his words would leave both children and adults silent. Some said he could not speak spiritual teachings, but he lived like a monk in the countryside, no robes, no sermons, just a lifetime of never shedding a tear that did not seep into the earth. One autumn evening, when dry leaves whispered from the village outskirts to its far end, the carpenter gently pushed open the old door leading into his mother's former room, evening light filtering through cracks. Wooden walls coated with straw clay, and each step he took felt like holding back something unnamed. His hand brushed the frayed cloth hanging on the wall, once used by his mother to wipe sweat, to catch tears, to embrace sleepless nights, scented with gentle sacrifice no words could explain. On the bamboo table where she once sat preparing vegetables or mending clothes, only an old wooden bowl remained, placed upside down. That same bowl they had shared together, not from poverty, but from love so complete it needed no division. In the fading dusk, he sat in his familiar seat, leaning against the column, gazing at the Bodhi tree he had planted after her passing, now tall and spreading across one corner of the yard, leaves falling every month as a reminder of impermanence through nature's language. When the breeze stirred them, they rustled like the cloth his mother once wore on her shoulder as she walked past the porch. It startled him, not with coldness, but with a soft ache. A few sparrows hopped branch to branch, chirping with exuberance, the sounds bringing back early childhood mornings when his mother tapped gently on the wall. "Wake up, son, the sun is up and today I need your water to carry." He once frowned at those words and grudgingly got up, but now that echo became the sweetest resonance of his life, irreplaceable. No one in the village understood why he never left the place to seek a more prosperous life. even though his craft could easily produce high-income work in the city. When asked, he replied, "I stay to hold the sound of my mother's footsteps. Afraid if I leave, I will no longer hear them." His answer seemed strange, but made everyone fall silent. Because we all have someone who passed through our lives and stayed forever, not in form, but in feeling. Every year on her death anniversary, he did not hold grand rituals or invite monks for chanting or host a feast. Instead, he sat on the porch, lit a bundle of incense, placed the old wooden bowl on the table, offered a piece of vegetable, a portion of rice, clasped his hands, and closed his eyes. He prayed not for her return, nor to hope she could hear, but quietly invited her to eat, just as she had once offered her small but wholehearted meals to her little son with love. Over time, the wooden bowl cracked at the rim. He did not throw it away or replace it. Instead, he used pine resin to mend it, placed it on a high shelf, and covered it with an embroidered white cloth. It was the one thing he would not allow anyone to touch, nor explained why. For those who understand needed no words, and to those who did not, words would only shrink love. Villagers began sending children to learn from him, not to become carpenters, but hoping they would absorb something no book could teach: patience, stillness, and the way you listened to wood in silence as if conversing with a soul. In the eyes of those children, he wasn't a teacher or an artisan, but something more like a father, never preaching, yet in every action, every breath, inspiring them to want to live better. That afternoon, when the last slant of sunlight filtered through the eaves and cast long shadows from the Bodhi tree across the yard, the carpenter sat alone. He placed his hand on the wooden bowl and closed his eyes, as if listening to something distant, perhaps the sound of water flowing from the village well, perhaps the echo of his mother tapping the wooden wall years ago. Or maybe the stillness in his own heart resonating like a bell that needs no metal, needs no striker, only a life once full of love, endurance, forgiveness, without demanding return. On a mist-covered mountain stands an ancient temple wedged against a sheer rock face. There lived an old Zen master in a small hermitage. He ate one meal a day, did not preach or receive visitors. Only those whose hearts were deep enough to climb 7 rough stone slopes without complaint were allowed in. Locals whispered he had once been a famed swordsman. After a bloody battle that shattered both sides, he abandoned his weapon and withdrew into practice, living without name or fame. He retained only a gaze as cold as an autumn lake and a gentle smile indistinguishable between greeting or farewell. Nobody knew his true name, they simply called him Master Vo, showing silent respect for the one who had cast aside all titles and glories, like tossing a stone into an abyss without needing its echo. One winter morning, when mist was so thick the grasses looked like pale ghosts, a young man, haggard and eyes glowing like embers, arrived at the last stone step. He did not bring offerings nor bow. He stood upright before the master, who was sweeping the courtyard. In a hoarse voice he said, "You killed my father." The master did not pause or look up. He said softly, like passing wind, "Did you come here to kill me?" The youth clenched his fist, eyes filled with unspeakable pain, chest heaving, as if cradling a nameless hatred born from years of sorrow over his mother's cries and his sister's silent gaze. He remained silent, then drew a small rusted dagger from his robe, carefully polished as if an heirloom burdened with memory. The blade trembled in his hands, not from wind, but from the struggle between hate and the master's serene presence. The master put down his broom and sat on the stone step. Looking straight into the youth's eyes without fear, challenge, or plea, he simply asked, "When you kill me, will your father's grievance truly disappear?" The young man fell silent, not because the question was too wise, but because he realized he had never considered it. He only thought he must kill, must avenge, must do something to ease the pain that twisted every time he remembered his mother's lament or his sister's silence. The master saw his trembling hand and continued, "I have killed many. Since setting down my sword, every night I dream of them, how each died, how each cursed, how each cried. I live with them, never forget. Do you think I have peace?" The youth slowly sat down, dagger still in hand, but no longer raised. His voice faltered. "I thought killing you would bring peace to my father, but now I wonder, did my father ever want me to become a killer?" The master nodded gently, as if that was the answer the youth needed. The mountain wind rose, scattering golden needles from the pine beside the hermitage, falling across the frosty courtyard like old thoughts dissolving. The master said, "Hatred is like holding hot coals. Wishing another burns, while the one who suffers first is yourself. How long have you held it?" The young man dropped the dagger, bowed his head, whispering, 17 years. 17 years I lived to reach today." Silence hung between them, broken only by rustling wind and distant forest birds. After a long pause, the master stood, picked up the dagger, and gazed at it as though at his younger self, an indelible scar that could be laid down. He handed it back, saying, "Take it home. Carve your father's name on it. Then bury it under a tree in front of your house. Each year on his death day. Dig it up, clean it, then rebury. That will let you remember him without killing again." For the first time a tear slipped down the young man's brown cheek, not from letting go, but because he found another path, one his father, if alive, might also have chosen. He left the hermitage and did not look back, though his heart felt immeasurably lighter, as if a childhood stone had finally been set down. The sky broke open to a faint glow, sun rays filtering through mist like a silent blessing. At the mountain's base, he paused beneath the distant temple, bowed deeply, not to apologize to his former enemy, but to bury a part of the past within, without spilling more blood. At a nearby misty monastery hung with hundreds of bamboo wind chimes that sometimes chimed like time itself breathing, an aging monk lived with 3 novices. The youngest, named Haku, was frail and quiet, habitually clumsy, dropping bowls, scorching rice, spilling water, and often scolded by the older boys for slowing things down. Haku never complained. He quietly bowed and cleaned up, sometimes his eyes showed sorrow. Like a faded leaf drifting over the water's surface, never touching its depths before being swept away by indifferent currents. One day after dinner, while washing dishes, Haku cracked a vintage porcelain teacup, its bluish glaze dulled by dust. It was the very cup the master used each morning for tea and chanting. Haku panicked, almost cried, but instead he placed the cup on the table, wrote a tiny apology note, then went to sit under the pine behind the temple, eyes heavy like dusk before rain. The master saw the broken cup and note. He said nothing. He sat beside the table, poured tea into the cracked cup, and slowly took a sip as though nothing had happened. The next day, instead of punishment, he gathered all 3 novices in the courtyard and placed before each a different cup, one intact, one fine cracked, one repaired with gold in the Japanese kintsugi tradition. The master told them, "Each of you choose a cup to drink tea from. But choose not because it's pretty, nor out of fear of my anger, but as if selecting the heart you would live with." They hesitated. The eldest chose the perfect cup. The next chose the gold-mended one, and Haku stared long, then reached for the cracked cup, the one he'd shattered yesterday. Bowing his head, he whispered, "I accept my mistake, but I also wish to care for this cup to the end." The master smiled, eyes reflecting late afternoon stillness, and said, "A broken cup is no longer whole, but it becomes a vessel of truth. Those who live with honesty do not fear cracks." That afternoon, as the last rays of sunlight slanted under the porch and cast long shadows of the Bodhi tree across the ground, the carpenter sat alone. He placed his hand gently on the wooden bowl and closed his eyes, as if listening to something far away, perhaps the sound of water from the village well, perhaps the memory of his mother lightly tapping the cedar wall long ago, or perhaps the stillness within his heart resonating softly like a bell that needs no metal, needs no strike, only a life once filled with love, suffering, forgiveness, without demanding anything in return. On a mist-laden mountain, an ancient temple clings to soaring rock. Living in a small hermitage, there was an old Zen master who ate one simple meal a day and never preached. He welcomed only those whose hearts were deep enough to climb 7 rugged slopes without complaint. Locals whispered that he had once been a celebrated swordsman, but after a fatal battle that shattered both sides, he laid down his sword and vanished into practice. Living without honor or ambition, he preserved only a gaze as clear as an autumn lake and a smile so subtle one could not tell if it was greeting or farewell. His true name was forgotten. People simply called him Master Vo. Silently venerating the one who had cast off titles and glory, like throwing a stone into an abyss and not waiting for its echo. One winter dawn, when the mist was thick enough that plants seemed like pale ghosts, a young man appeared at the final stone step, his gaunt face, eyes burning like embers. He brought no gifts and bowed to no one. Standing before the master, who was sweeping the courtyard, he said in a hoarse voice, "You killed my father." The master did not pause or look up. Instead he replied softly, as gently as a breeze, "Then have you come to kill me?" The youth clenched his fist. His eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it carved into the air, his chest heaved, clutching a nameless hatred born from years of remembering his mother's cries and his sister's silent gaze. He did not speak. He pulled from his robe a small dagger, its blade rusted but meticulously polished. It trembled in his hand, not from wind, but from the struggle between vengeance and the calm presence before him. The master set down his broom and sat on the stone step, looking straight into the young man's eyes, not with fear, not with challenge, not with plea. He asked, "If you kill me, will your father's suffering truly ease?" The young man fell silent, not because the question was too profound, but because he had never thought of it. He only knew he must kill, avenge, Do something to ease the pain that twisted whenever he remembered his mother's tears or his sister's silence. The master saw his trembling hand and continued, I have killed many. Since laying down my sword. Each night I dream of them, how they died. How they cursed. How they cried. I live with them, never forgetting. Do you think I found peace? The youth slowly sat down. Dagger still in hand but no longer raised. His voice trembled. I thought killing you would bring peace to my father, but now I wonder whether he ever wanted me to become a killer himself. The master nodded gently, as though that was the answer the youth most needed. The mountain wind began to stir, dislodging golden pine needles that drifted across the frosty courtyard like old thoughts dissolving in the mind. The master said, hatred is like holding hot coals, hoping another burns, while the one suffering first is yourself. How long have you carried it? The young man dropped the dagger and lowered his head, whispering, 17 years. 17 years of living only to reach this day. Silence settled, broken only by rustling wind and distant forest birds. After a long moment, the master stood, picked up the dagger, and gazed at it as if at his own younger self, a scar no longer painful, but no less real. He handed it back, saying, take it home. Carve your father's name on it. Then bury it beneath a tree in front of your house. Each year on his death day. Dig it up, clean it, rebury it. That will be your way of remembering him without killing again. Tears streamed down the youth's weathered face, not from letting go, but because he had finally found another path, a path his father, if alive, might also have chosen. He left the hermitage without turning back. Yet his heart felt immensely lighter, as though a childhood burden had finally been set down. The sky parted into a soft glow. Rays of sunshine filtered through the mist like a blessing spoken silently. At the mountain base, he paused beneath the distant temple and bowed deeply, not only to offer forgiveness to a former enemy, but to bury a past within himself without shedding blood again. In a nearby mountain temple hanging with countless bamboo wind chimes that whispered the passage of time, lived an elderly monk with 3 young novices. The youngest, Haku, was frail and silent, always accidentally breaking something: bowls, rice, pots. The elder novices scolded him for slowing the chores. Haku never protested. He quietly bowed and cleaned the mess. His eyes sometimes filled with sorrow, like a dried leaf drifting across a pond, never touching its depth before being carried away by the indifferent current. One afternoon, while washing dishes, Haku cracked a porcelain teacup, the very cup the master used each morning for tea and chanting. Panic rose in him. He almost cried. But instead, he placed the cup on the table, wrote a tiny apology note, and withdrew to sit under the pine tree behind the temple, his gaze heavy as a sky before rain. The master noticed the cracked cup and note. He said nothing. He sat beside the table, poured tea into the broken cup, and sipped slowly, as though nothing had happened. The next day, instead of punishment, he called the 3 novices to the courtyard and placed before each of them a different cup, a completely intact cup, a lightly cracked one, and one repaired with golden kintsugi. The master said, "Choose your cup for tea, but choose not because it is pretty, nor out of fear of anger, but as if choosing the heart you wish to live with." They hesitated. The eldest chose the perfect cup. The next selected the gold-mended one. But Haku paused longest, then quietly picked up the cracked cup, that same one he had broken. Bowing gently, he said, "I accept my mistake, and I vow to care for this cup until the end." The master smiled, eyes soft like the late afternoon stillness, and said, "A cracked cup is not perfect, but it becomes a vessel of truth. One who lives honestly fears not the cracks." Because of that, Haku was entrusted each morning with preparing the master's tea. Though the cup was cracked, he cleaned it daily, poured the tea with steady hands, and placed it reverently on the table as if performing a ritual. The master continued to drink from that same cup, drinking in the invisible cracks of the young disciple's heart. When visitors came, he spoke of the cracked cup as one speaks of an old friend. True beauty does not lie in wholeness, but in care shown to the broken. Listeners were often struck silent, some smiled, others shed tears. Many realized they too carried a cracked cup within, one too fragile to pour tea from. Years later, when Haku had matured into a serene monk with eyes as clear as dawn, someone asked, "Master, what was the first lesson you learned on this path?" Haku simply smiled and pointed to the aged cup displayed in the hermitage. "I learned how to accept a cracked heart, and still keep it warmed with tea." In the final winter of the master's life, as the bamboo forest wind carried the scent of cold earth, the master summoned Haku and returned the cup, saying softly, "You keep it, not for its value, but because in it I recognized you. A cracked cup, yet the person not broken, that is the path." That night, as snow began dusting the temple courtyard, Haku sat alone in the meditation chamber, placing the cup on the table and pouring tea. The tea had barely cooled when the master passed away, but the aroma remained, like a silent verse, like a final pause in a melody written for one who once shattered yet did not lose themselves. Every story, every silent bell echoing across ordinary life, guides one back to a simple, profound truth. Not reacting is not about suppressing emotions, but returning to a deep awareness that has always existed within us. Beneath anger, hurt, desire, or resentment, lies a transparent realm untouched, the place where all reactions dissolve like mist when the light of wisdom dawns. In that illumination, we begin to see, reaction is the echo of the past, while response is the living wisdom of the present. When we no longer identify with what we feel, perceive, or possess, we become free. Not, "I am sorrow." Not, "I am failure." Not, "I am that memory," but simply, "I observe that, I am present with that." A miraculous transformation from delusion to clarity. Ultimately, the deepest insight does not come from any technique outside, nor from an authority, but from recognition within profound silence. The deepest stillness arises not from outside, but from realizing, "I am the space that aware." Only then does reaction settle like sediment in clear water. Only then does peace arise, not from attainment, not from avoidance, but from return. Now, as your journey gently closes, allow the mind to loosen from the stories, like a leaf drifting on a stream. Outside, the moon hangs high, its soft silk-like light infusing everything with pure stillness. The night wind stirs the bamboo grove, caressing your temples and weary shoulders. The distant trickle of streams echoes like whispers from Mother Earth, comforting a long day finally at rest. In that space, The scent of incense drifts, gently touching every tired cell, opening a silent door guiding you back to yourself. Nothing more is required now. No holding, no pushing away. Let your mind still as the lake after rain. Though storms may rage outside, your heart can remain a calm sky, neither dragged by sound nor attached to thought. Simply present, whole, peaceful, as if stillness itself is the refuge you rest in. Now you may gently shift your awareness to the breath. Feel cool air entering, warmth gently leaving, slow, steady, natural. No control, no force, only breathing. Like a river flowing, like clouds drifting across a vast sky. Release tense shoulders, loosen your hands, relax your face. The one that carried expressions all day long. Let your legs rest. Let your spine rest against Earth Mother. Let each cell dissolve into gentle peace. There is nothing else to do now. No more thought. No need to go anywhere. Meditation becomes no technique, but permission to let go, to release, to merge into deep stillness. In that place, sleep arrives like a friend entering through an open door, no knock needed. You need not wait, just smile silently. Like the moon smiling in the silent firmament. Sleep well, your heart is returning, all is enough. Thank you for walking this journey. A journey neither colorful nor dramatic nor loud, but quietly touching the deepest corners of the soul. If any story made you pause, made you still, or simply feel lighter, perhaps you have touched a very real part of yourself. The Silent Soul Garden channel is not here to teach, nor to convince, but to remind you, you are not alone. You are still listening, and you can always return to the peace already present within you. If you wish to continue nurturing this stillness, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and return whenever your heart needs pause. You need not do much, just one deep breath, one moment of non-reaction, one remembrance. I am not the storm. I am the sky containing it. Wishing you a peaceful night? The wind has softened, the moon still bright. Let your heart sleep in the gentleness of the present moment. Until we meet again, in silent space.